My family came from eastern Oklahoma. In 41, we moved to California. We left our Oklahoma homes in Texas and Arkansas. So don't ask me where I got a Bakersfield draw. Lifetimes came and when we crossed the border. Safe and heaven sent, praise the Lord. A life we built in Bakersfield, a home away from home. Don't ask me why I've got a Bakersfield draw. All we really did back home was farming. So often we would move away for harvest. We drive around from town to town, wherever work may call. So don't ask me how I got a Bakersfield draw.
All right, all right, all right. Of course, that's a little song called Bakersfield Draw. And people that know me probably know why I'm playing that song. I've never heard it before other than earlier today because I was thinking about Bakersfield Draw, of course, because this past Wednesday was the 54th. Hey, Jen, the 54th anniversary of the Zodiac Killer's third canonical attack at Lake Berryessa. And of course, we know Brian Hartnell. And I'll read this little piece. This is from one of my favorite websites to read about Zodiac related material, and it's called the Quester Files by a guy named Gian Quasar. And I think he had a suspect for a while. He was developing. I think he just called him Steve, but he was developing his own Zodiac killer suspect. And but he writes about different aspects of the Zodiac case. Not just about this suspect he had, but these different aspects of Kathleen Johns, Lake Berryessa, of course. I'll read some of that, and then all the canonical crimes, and then some other things. But it's really well written. I like the different things he brings out and some extra stuff he brings to it. But he's talking here, and I'll put a link to his site as well if you haven't heard it before. But it's called the Quester Files. If you just Google Quester Files and Zodiac Killer, you'll find it. But he's talking about the hood the Zodiac Killer wore at Lake Berryessa. Of course, we know that from Brian Hartnell surviving the attack. And he put the hood was remarkable, though it was black fabric. It was neatly sewn about the edge, so it conformed to what seemed a square grocery store bag underneath. It does. It looks like a paper bag you get at the grocery store. The top of the hood, therefore, did not conform to the head, but was square like a graduation cap. Two eye holes were cut into it, and clipped over was a pair of clip-on shades. The hood was attached to a surcoat that fell over the shoulders and extended down to the waist in front and back. Over the center of the surcoat was the heraldic symbol is usually emblazoned on a knight's surcoat. There was a strange symbol. It was a circle about 3 inches wide with a cross in it, which extended about an inch beyond the circle. It was, of course, the Zodiac symbol, though Hartnell did not know what it was. What did you want? Asked Hartnell. Now take it easy, replied the hooded man. All I want's your money. There's nothing to worry about. All I want is your money. The man spoke precisely, even in a drawl that Brian could not identify. Of course, that goes back to the earlier police file reports about Brian Hartnell talking about the Zodiac killer's voice, because Brian could not see his face, as we know, because he had the hood over. Actually, Cecilia got a look at him before he put the hood over his head when he was closer to the tree, but he was too far away. The only thing Cecilia could really tell from that was that he was white. And once he got closer to them, he had already put the hood on, of course. But there again, it mentions the draw that Brian Hartnell heard. And I remember I can't remember where it was, but he described it as not particularly a Southern draw. And going back to the song I just played, a Bakersfield draw has some Southern aspects to it, but not really, because it's Oklahoma. It's people that transplanted from Oklahoma to Bakersfield, which made up, I think in the 20s, 30s, and 40s, made up probably 80% of the whole population of Bakersfield. And they all had that. It was a certain draw people had in Bakersfield. And I'll try to find some people, some YouTube videos where people have that accent. It's really certain words that they pronounce that have that draw from Bakersfield that comes out. And when people from Bakersfield would go into places like Los Angeles for, things like MRIs and stuff that you couldn't get done in Bakersfield, I think in the 80s or 90s, and they would immediately know. People in LA were like, "You're from Bakersfield, aren't you?" Because they knew that particular draw they had. And I've always wondered if Brian Hartnell had ever heard a Bakersfield draw, because it's obviously there. You just heard a song written about it. A lot of people there still have it, especially the older folks. And I believe that Chaney probably had that back in the late 60s, early 70s. And you lose it over time. It's like my mom, my sister's on here. She can attest to the fact that my mom used to have an East Texas accent, especially when she was younger. She had a couple of margaritas. It would come out, and I don't hear it so much anymore. But when she was younger, she had it because she was born and raised in East Texas, and she had a certain, they would say words a certain way that you wouldn't particularly hear in Houston, where you weren't kind of removed from all that. But I think he probably had that in the late 60s and the early 70s. So if I ever get a hold of Brian's son Benjamin, I want to ask if his father's ever, being not too far away because he lives in Yoma Linda, that area around Riverside, if he's ever been to Bakersfield or knew anyone from Bakersfield, California, and heard a Bakersfield draw. I would love to know if that's what he was, kind of alluding to there at Lake Berryessa. So let me go to the slides. Oh, that's cool, Pedro. Let me put that up. You went into the coffee shop on Geary where Paul Stein picked up his last fare. Zodiac. Nobody had any idea of what you were talking about. Yeah, that's strange. I mean, especially now in a city like San Francisco, you think no one would ever forget that or what happened, but you brought it up and no one heard of it, huh? Bakersfield, all the rednecks in the 60s and 70s changed in the 90s with an influx of Latinos. Good point, Pedro. That's probably true. Yes, there is a lot of Latinos now in the Bakersfield area, and that's exactly what you're saying is when they came in around the 90s, for sure. But yeah, I'd say from the 40s all the way to the 70s that you could hear that Bakersfield draw. And there's another video on YouTube where they have some locals talking about it. They're saying certain words that would only be pronounced that way for people from Bakersfield. So yeah, I'd love to know, other than hearing Chaney's voice, which I'm sure has changed from what it sounds like on his name was Arthur Leigh Allen, to what it did in 1969, of course, when Berryessa happened. But I specifically want to know if Brian's ever heard a Bakersfield draw and if that's what he remembered about it. Hey, Steven. Well, that's interesting. Morford and Grinnell averaged out the weight and height of Zodiac from all descriptions. It comes from 5'9", 205 pounds, barrel-chested, round face. Well, Chaney's got barrel-chested wrapped up, and he wins that contest. And when you bring it down to 5'9", what's bringing that down is probably Mike Mageau's height estimate from Blue Rock Springs Park, which should really be thrown out. Number one, Mageau was sitting in a car. He's looking up. the attacker. He's got a flashlight in his face, and he was already shot up twice. Of course, he gets the first rounds, and then he's grimacing in pain. He's making too much noise. Of course, the attacker comes back, fires at him again. He winds up in the back seat, of course. But Mageau's whole everything Mageau said should pretty much be thrown out just because of that. He really did not get a good look at the guy, and for him to give a height description is really kind of screwed up. So if you throw Mageau out of there, you're really closer to 5'10", 5'11". And of course, going back to Lake Berryessa, Cecilia gave what I think is the best height description, not just because she said 2 inches taller than Deputy Dave Collins, which he was 5'10", and he said, how tall? I'm going to stand where he was approximately standing. I'm 5'10". How tall do you think he was? And she said about 2 inches taller than you. So that makes 6 feet. And of course, when you see the famous sketch that Graysmith did of the hooded Zodiac, where, of course, Graysmith's a political cartoonist. He's an artist. He drew that, and it shows the little height chart by it. It's got like the top of the Zodiac's hood is right at 6 feet tall. That's where that comes from, is Cecilia. And of course, Brian was a bad judge of height because he's 6'7", of course. But we'll get to that. Hey, Tony, I know I missed your birthday. What day was your birthday, Tony? I know it was it Thursday? I'm pretty sure it wasn't the same day as the 54th anniversary of Lake Berryessa, which was Wednesday, but I know you just had your birthday, Tony. So happy belated, even though I did put it on your Facebook. So I did catch you on your birthday. But I don't remember, was it Thursday? Or maybe it was the 27th, which would be interesting, but your birthday was close to Berryessa. And I want to go to this, speaking of Tony. And you know what that is? This is yours, Tony. I'm going to bring it up. It says, here's your killer at Berryessa. We were made to believe he was a peeping Tom. However, in Professor Horan's 2-part hoax theory documentary, one of the girls told her story about what happened. Her story completely blows the peeping Tom notion away. He was stalking them for 40 minutes. He went behind trees to get closer. He finally decided that 3 girls who were already spooked by him was too much and left. So, Tony, you think that is definitely the Zodiac, right, Tony? And of course, I was looking at more of this stuff today from this sketch that came from the 3 sunbathers, and I want to read this part. This will help. This will give a little bit of background. Of course, when we talk about this guy, he's also referred to as the voyeur at Lake Berryessa from 3 girls that were sunbathing. And there's always been a debate. Was this guy the Zodiac or was he not? Tony thinks it is. So this is a really good background on it. 3 young college girls from England went to soak up some sun on the beach that day. Of course, beaches in quotes because we're talking about a lake shore. They went to a spot about a couple of miles north of the Sugarloaf A&W roadside rest area. When getting out of their car and walking to their spot, they noticed a late model light or sky blue Chevrolet pull in to the parking area and head south, then back up until its bumpers almost touched their bumpers. It was a 2-door sedan, California plates, rear window tinted very dark, and it was a man in his 20s. They provided a significant clue about the car. They were either car savvy women or they talked to their boyfriends first. That's interesting. They held it to be a late model 1966 or 67 because of a key difference in it. Its tail lights were long, not rounded, and accurately reported on one report to be square headlights. All headlights were round back then, but those on the Mustang. This tidbit of information pinpoints the car easily. It had to be a 66 or 67, most likely 66 Impala. The taillights on an Impala had remained round through 1965. Then the 3 round taillights on either side were replaced by 3 rectangular red taillights affixed to each other for the 1966 year. The Chevy Caprice was as yet its own model. It was merely a higher-end Impala. The other 2 contenders were the Biscayne and Bel Air, but these last 2 had only 2 round lights, which in turn were replaced by only 2 square lights. Only the Impala had long brake breaker taillight. So it's talking about the fact that these girls got a good look at his car, and they came up with this composite sketching of the person. One of them described him as good looking. And of course, this sketch does not look much like the one from the Presidio Heights, of course, the famous Zodiac killer sketch. Although people like Tony now are saying are pretty sure they think that this must have been Zodiac because he was creeping on these 3 sunbathing girls from Angwin. Of course, that's the same college that Cecilia Shepard was attending at the time that she was attacked. And there's just lots of speculation about it. Could it have been Dennis Land? Somebody said that it looked exactly like Dennis Land. I don't know because I only have one picture of Dennis Land. I think they showed it in the documentary, but he's wearing his military outfit and he's got a cap on. So you can't really see if he had this dark kind of hair. I've also seen somebody claim that this might have been Bucky Stewart. And people, there's a good picture of Bucky Stewart online. And he looks similar to this guy. So I don't know. People have speculated this could have been Arthur Leigh Allen wearing a dark-haired wig. Who knows? And other people suggested it could have been this guy because he looks kind of similar here. Because I don't think Allen was the attacker at Berryessa for a lot of reasons. I mean, it was he's using his right hand, according to Brian, to do the stabbing when he tied up Brian and Cecilia. He's got his he came out with a gun with it in his right hand. He had his knife was in a sheath on his left hip, which is what you would do if you already had a gun holstered on your right. You'd put the knife in the left, but then you have to either reach across or switch hands to put the knife in your right hand to stab with. And Allen may have been ambidextrous at some point, and he could write some with his left hand because he was taught to. But there's no way that he's going to be using his non-dominant hand to stab people. And there's just a million reasons why I don't think it was Allen as the attacker. So hey, Darnell, but who knows? I don't know. I'm not sure if the so-called voyeur from Lake Berryessa was the attacker or not. I think somebody pegged his height at 6 feet tall, which is interesting because that's the height that Cecilia said. So that's one thing that you could put it in there. And then remember, Brian and Cecilia, and I say this a billion times, could see the brown hair coming through the eyelets of the mask and under the clip-on glasses. So is this description of this guy on the left, would his hair been long enough coming down? Of course, here it looks black, and both Brian and Cecilia both said brown hair. That's in the police files. It's something they didn't recollect later. They said they could see the brown hair coming through the eyelets. So it must have been fairly long in the middle to have made it all the way down through the eyelets, at least down to here. So I don't know. I mean, maybe it's him, but then you got to think about the fact that he's targeting 3 women, which would have been a departure from 2 heterosexual couples from Lake Herman Road, Blue Rock Springs. But now he's going to switch to 3 females and not a couple. Maybe he had to make the attack on that day because it was special to him, and he wasn't finding a good target until he happens upon Brian and Cecilia. Who knows? And of course, Stein was a lone male. So there's a departure from the first 3 attacks, which were male and female couples. But I don't know. This guy could have just been a creeping on these people. But it's interesting. Oh, that's interesting, Tony. Your birthday is September 29th. Today, Cecilia died. Was your 21st birthday. Yep, that's right, because she died 2 days later at Queen of the Valley Hospital. I know. Who else said that? That's funny, Dennis. Somebody else said that. You weren't the first that said that's me. That's me right there. Right there on Tony's picture. That's hilarious. Yes, I did hear that before, Dennis. But I'm glad you mentioned that because that's funny. That sketch is creepy. Which one? The one of Cheney or the one of the voyeur? That ain't Cheney, just a creepy guy. Cheney is a creepy guy. He's very creepy, Pedro. I think he's interfering with this because every time I put your comment up, it just starts going away again. Bill, did any of the victims ever say anything about a suspicious person, odd phone calls, a stalker, or anything strange prior to the attack? Any of the Zodiac victims? No, I've never heard that. No, never. I never heard any of them say that. Let me go back. Never heard that from any of them. So this comes from, of course, this was the title of this show. is talking about this person that wrote into some of the not Bay Area, but some of the newspapers from around Vallejo, and I think what was the other one? The one was I think the Napa newspaper or up in that area, and this guy was writing in under the name Friar Puck. Of course, we changed it to Fry, F-R-Y. Of course, the Zodiac like to cruise win Friday night, F-R-Y, Fry night. But some of these that Neil pointed out really look and sound very, very Zodiac-like. And this one, I'll read this one. And this is talking about, I think this was not the Gilbert and Sullivan version of Mikado that was done at Vallejo High, because Vallejo High put on the Mikado in 65, I think. I think this was another school up there that maybe Napa or Sonoma, somewhere up there, not far away from Lake Berryessa, had also done it, I think in the 50s. So I might be wrong on that, but I think this is where this one comes from. But I'll read it. It says, letter to the editor. Of course, right there, it sounds like Zodiac, of course, and his many missives. But it says, sirs, in Gilbert and Sullivan's Mikado, the Mikado himself sings descriptively of his penal system. He says his object all sublime he shall achieve in time, to let the punishment fit the crime. I mean, that sounds so Zodiacish. And make each prisoner pen unwillingly represent a source of innocent merriment. One of his choicest penalties is to take brilliant sharks and require them to play with twisted cues and elliptical billiard balls. Remember, Zodiac quoted that actual part of the Mikado in one of the letters. Does the Mikado suppose for 1 minute that he is original in how he treats people? ? Life has been given lots of people frustrating circumstances that make the Mikado system humane indeed. As George Goebel says, I'm human. I've got affidavits to prove it. George Goebel might be more believable if he had some frustrations to prove it with. Yours, Friar Puck. That sounds very Zodiac-ish in so many ways. And of course, he's writing in about the Mikado, something we know the Zodiac like. And here's another one. It says, letters to the editor. Sirs, the mailman recently left a circular which advertises a whole list of books. They are on the subject of family life. One title is Democracy in the Home. Another is The Recovery of Family Life. Another title advises, don't be afraid of your child. Still another is labeled The Mentally Retarded Child. I looked hopefully for the one that would seem to be most relevant of all, the mentally retarded parent. That is the really crucial problem, isn't it? Friar Puck. That sounds Zodiacish, of course, calling the parents retarded. It just seems like that angst and wanting that, an axe to grind, writing it to the newspaper. There might have been more that this guy wrote in, but I think these are from the mid 50s. And I know that Vallejo High School put on a version of the Mikado in 1965, and then another school, I think, did it in the mid 50s. But I think these are from that general area, Napa, Sonoma, Vallejo papers. This guy writing in calling himself Friar Puck. And of course, Friar Puck may or may not come from a painting. I can't remember the name of the artist now, but it's like a little cherub looking, evil looking dude flying around, like a 300 or 400 old painting from this one artist. It's really creepy. It's something I could see the Zodiac picking up on. So I don't know if this is maybe Arthur Leigh Allen or somebody else, or it's just a strange coincidence. But these have been talked about before, but I think recently Neil pulled them up. Yeah, Merle Haggard. Yes, he was from Bakersfield. That's true. Dennis Land did commit suicide on Darlene Farron's birthday, which is kind of weird. Now, let me go back to this. Now, still speaking about the Mikado and the presentation done at Vallejo, it says VHS, that's Vallejo High School. We're presenting Mikado this week. And this is something that Neil Arnold found that I corroborated for him. But guess who played the Mikado, the role of the Mikado, in the 1965 production from the seniors at Vallejo High School in 1965. Of course, Allen had long graduated before 1965, but none other than the brother of Arthur Leigh Allen's best friend, who was, of course, Allen-Reinhardt. His younger brother, David, played the role of the Mikado in 1965. So there's another Allen connect. There's an Allen connection now to the Mikado. Of course, we know Don Chaney's is from Bakersfield College, where all Avery's friends were rounding out the cast in 1953 in Bakersfield, going back to Bakersfield. But this one is now an Allen connection because you'll see here where it mentions Dave Reinhardt. It says pitch to us, and it says Dave Reinhardt. This is on the bottom right of the one where you can see the characters. It says Dave Reinhardt as the Mikado. I mean, there is an Allen connection now, and Allen and Glenn Reinhardt were still best friends for really life. Allen, of course, in his will, willed his Carmen Gia to Glenn Reinhardt. It was considered his prized possession, and I know he had two. I think he may have gotten rid of one of them before he actually passed away. But in his will, he willed it to Glenn Reinhardt, not his brother Ron. He willed it to Glenn, who was always his best friend. Glenn was a big defender of Arthur Leigh Allen all through the years. Of course, he had a trouble trying to defend his child molestation stuff, but Glenn Reinhardt would never accept that his best friend could have been the Zodiac killer. But isn't that a nice find by Neil that Allen's best friend's younger brother was playing the role of the Mikado in 65 at Vallejo High School? Good pick there, Neil. Very, very nice. And I can't remember not if Friar Puck had written in about that production or not, but I know that the one there, I think it was actually from the mid 50s and from maybe Napa High, but it wasn't Vallejo. I think that one clipping was from. Pedro, you know who went to Bakersfield College? Paul Avery went to Bakersfield College. Don Chaney went to Bakersfield College at the same time. Yeah, Captain J. Some people think that Dennis Lamb was the one that stabbed Brian and Cecilia. Of course, that's kind of put forward by Professor Horn. But there's no way he could have gotten to the payphone in time. True. There's really no way. That's really the biggest hole you can put in Dennis Land. If Dennis Land was the attacker of Brian and Cecilia, it would have absolutely had to have been someone else that made the phone call from the payphone near Napa PD headquarters, because they know approximately when Dennis Land was still there, and there's no way he could have made that drive. Remember when the emergency personnel and the police would drive all the way to Lake Berryessa from Napa? From that, of course, that's in the jurisdiction for Napa PD to, that particular crime. It took them a long time to get there. And there's absolutely, it was impossible that Dennis Land could have made that phone call from that payphone. It's impossible. So if Dennis Land was the attacker at Berryessa, he was in cahoots with somebody else that was prepared to make that phone call from that payphone. So it's absolutely impossible. Yep. That's right, Captain J. Oh, yeah. Thank you, Moonlight. Yes, I do. Manali's my favorite. If I had to bring a third party into anything, be it Chaney, Allen, it's Manali. Manali, I mean, Manali's Fred Manali had, from his writings, he was a creative writing professor, had more sayings and stuff like whatchamacallit, all these kind of things. And I shall, he used a lot. I mean, if Manali wasn't so tall and thin, he would make a great Zodiac suspect. He would, just based on his writing and how much that the way he wrote compared to how the Zodiac wrote is the most similar of anybody that would even be a dark horse Zodiac suspect. I mean, the biggest thing against Manali is that he's tall and thin. I never saw his exact height, but to me, he looks like he's at least 6'3", and he's thin. He's a thin guy, dark hair, nice looking guy. He looks a little more like this. Manali looks a little more like that sketch than a lot of the other suspects. But the problem with Manali is he can't be Zodiac. He's just too thin and too tall, in my opinion. And everybody that was a witness to Zodiac said stocky, barrel-chested, Majot beefy build. If you give Majot anything, it says is that he did recall the guy he saw being beefy. He used the words beefy build were the exact term he used. Is that true? Land interviewed the three girls? I don't remember that. What did they tell him? So the three girls, if Land interviewed the three girls, you think that he would have You think the three girls would have said, you kind of sound like or look like him? I know the three girls didn't talk to that man, but you think they might have said, "Oh, you kind of look like the guy we saw," and no one said it. And remember, Dennis Land's the one that picked up Brian Hartnell, and some people thought, when Brian Hartnell was crawling and bleeding to death, and he was finally picked up by Dennis Land, and he thought it was the Zodiac coming to finish him off, and a lot of people thought, "Oh, that's his instinct because it was Land." But you have to think about it. Brian got in the car with Land. He talked to Dennis Land, and you'd think that he would have picked up on the fact if it was the same guy that he was engaging in conversation before he started stabbing both of them. So I don't know. That's a tough one, but there's no way Dennis Land makes that phone call from Napa. It's just it's the time wise, it's impossible. No, no. Manali was very tall and slender, but I've seen people before say that he put on some weight later on. Every photo I've ever seen of Manali's really, he looks pretty thin. He looks like he's got a basketball build. But I don't know. He might look, Manali kind of does favor the voyeur sketch though, which I've never thought of till now. But Manali's interesting. I mean, he really is. Yeah, I always wonder if Allen knew him. I think Manali's a definite player for at least Kim Allen's death. I mean, Kim Allen alone, because when they found those creepy, sadistic drawings, he had one of Kim Allen, who was, of course, a Santa Rosa hitchhiker killer victim. They supposedly have some DNA from one of the Santa Rosa victims, and they've never come out with it. They never tested it against. I don't know what they test. I mean, they've never. I guess it's not a good enough sample to do a genealogy trace on, but they've never tested against anything else. I don't remember if I've seen I don't know if I've seen a younger picture of Ray Land, but I've never seen an older picture of Ray Land. I think I've seen one from high school, so I'd have to go back and find it. But I don't know, how old was Ray Land during Berryessa. I don't remember. I do have a high school photo of Ray Land, but I've never seen a more modern one. And of course, the only one of Dennis that exists that I know about is the one where he's wearing his military hat because he was military police. Going back to him, it was strange that he removed the crime scene, of course. Let me get back to this. So this is going back to the Quester files from Gene Quasar. And I think they're still talking about the car and what the three sunbathers saw. And they're talking about the car that was parked by Brian's car. It says the problem with all this is that the tire tracks were found 20 feet behind Hartnell's Carmen Ghia. These could have been from the Zodiac's car, but they could not possibly be those of the Chevrolet sedan Impala. This is one of the things that comes up all the time when people try to claim that the voyeur, the guy with the dark hair, could not have been the attacker of Brian and Cecilia because it did not match the impressions of the tires they took for the car that parked by Brian, supposedly when the Zodiac wrote the dates on Brian's car door. So this is what that's what he's discussing here. It said these could have been from the Zodiac's car, but they could not possibly those of a Chevrolet sedan Impala, which is what they determined that the girls saw. It said there were only 5.5 inches wide. These type of pizza cutter tires were on old cars, dragsters, and little monster-like hot rods kids had. Though only the front tires would have those. Even the rinky-dink Corvairs came with 6.5-inch tires. Some Chevy trucks came with 5.5-inch tires, and some early issue Corvairs might have them as well. One tire was actually 4.5 inches of a different tread. I remember that about the car that was parked near Brian's Carmen Ghia had tires that didn't match. So they surmised that this is an older car. Maybe whoever the Zodiac was, because they surmised that was the Zodiac's car where he parked when either he walked down to attack them or when he parked there to write on Brian's car door, which most people think he did it after he attacks them. He goes back to his car, writes that on Brian's car door, then he gets back in his car and leaves. But they know that the car that the girl saw could not match the tires from the tire impressions that were left by Brian's car. So that's one of the things that people do to try to claim that the voyeur guy could not have been Zodiac, is because the car they saw could not have been the one parked by Brian. It says this leaves us with two deductions. Either the girls didn't see the Zodiac, or he parked his Impala on the other side of the road, or further up or down, and left no tracks. Those 5.5-inch tire marks could therefore represent only some car that stopped for a while, some hot rider who stopped to quick tune his motor, or some old truck that stopped for some unknown reason. If they were the Zodiacs, then he was driving an old Corvair or truck, or some old car. The voyeur, that's the dark-haired dude, in the Impala was simply some guy out in his dad's or mom's car getting a kick out of watching girls in bikinis. He's right. It can only be one or the other. Yet this weight thing on the Zodiac is not entirely subjective. Footprints were left near Hartnell's Carmanguilla and at intervals along the path to the peninsula. Detective Sergeant Hal Stuck, the forensics man, measured, studied, and cast some. It eventually turned out that the person wearing the boots, we're talking about the 10.5 wing walkers that made these prints, was probably around 210 to 220 pounds. They definitely seemed to belong to the Zodiac. They were found by the passenger side door where he had to stand to write on the car door. The print showed they came from a military boot called a wing walker. They were size 10.5. Unfortunately, though, Snook really knew his thing. There is no evidence that Napa sheriffs went to the area where the girls reported their benign admirer. Though a track might not be found even a couple of days later, an isolated print or parts thereof could have been found that would tell us he too wore the wing walkers. If they did, we could be certain that the man the girl saw is one and the same with the Zodiac. That would mean that he was driving the blue Impala. The tread prints were found behind Hartnell's car, therefore are regulated to incidental. Snook's report does not say whether the footprints were found leading back to or coming from these tire treads, so we may rightly wonder if that was the Zodiac's car that had been parked behind Hartnell's Volkswagen. The Zodiac leaves us with another curious message here to the police. Not only did he get his jurisdictions grossly wrong, he gives us a wonderful redundancy. They were in the white Volkswagen Carmanguilla. That's what he said when he made the phone call from the Napa phone booth. Why not just say Carmanguilla? It was a minor point, but this may reflect habit. After all, who would say Chevy Corvette at Blue Rock Springs? He only says brown car. Yet there he is specific about the park. Here he is specific about the car, but nebulous about which park. That's some insight into him. So I don't think it's the same car. I really don't. I think that the voyeur guy is probably just some dude out, some dude out in mom and dad's car checking out 3 women. I mean, mainly because it's not a couple. If it was a couple that was being scoped and not 3 women, I would be a little more tend to believe that's Zodiac. But I'm going to pick, and for me, it doesn't really matter each way if it's the same person or not. But I just lean towards it not being. I lean towards the voyeur not being Zodiac. Yeah, I've covered Santa Rosa before, but I'll do it again. I've definitely covered it on this show, but I'm definitely gonna do some more Manali digging. Manali is an interesting guy. Pedro Avery drank on 29th and Dolores. Hunter Thompson and Warren Hinkle did as well, sometimes together. Avery was a character marrying Margot James of the Hookers Union, 3 Strange Dudes. Yes, they were. I know his daughter really well, Kristen. I know Kristen really well. I mean, anybody ever has a question for Paul Avery's daughter, I can get answered in 2 seconds. Thanks, Crime Vault. Appreciate it. So I don't know. That's a great find here that Glenn Reinhardt's younger brother is playing the Mikado. I mean, that's your Arthur Leigh Allen connection to the Mikado now. Is that his best friend's younger brother plays the role of the Mikado in the Vallejo High School production of the Mikado. So now you got a Cheney connection to the Mikado and Allen's brother. I mean, Allen's best friend's younger brother. And who knows if Allen went to that or not, being Glenn's younger brother, David. I think it said Ice Blue Impala. Yes. Witnesses saw yes, that's true. Good point, Captain J. Witnesses saw a white Impala on Lake Herman Road. Could an ice blue car appear white at night? It could. That's a good question. Yes, but excellent point. Yes, that was an Impala from Lake Herman Road. So that could be a connection between, there is no connection between Lake Berryessa and Lake Herman Road other than the word lake. That's really the only connection. I didn't see that. I saw Mark Hewitt and some people went to Lake Berryessa and did like a commemorative thing. Maybe that's what you're talking about. I think Mark Hewitt and some people went out to Lake Berryessa and commemorated it. I didn't go to Lake Berryessa. I should have when I was out in the area, but I was just did all I could, but I didn't get up there because I didn't know exactly the exact site. I know it's changed a lot over the years, but looking back, I should have gone while I had a chance. I should have. I wish I did. Wish I had checked that out. Make sure I didn't miss anything up here. But I do want to get that in front of Brian. I might text Brian Hartnell's son and just tell him, excuse the intrusion, but has your father ever heard of a Bakersfield draw? I would love to get Brian. I would love to get Brian's opinion on a Bakersfield draw going back to Berryessa. And I don't know. I mean, that's interesting about the car and the car's tires. I remembered all that. That wouldn't line up with what the girls said they saw. This is another comment somebody made on a Zodiac message board a few years ago, but it says they're talking about this guy that used to post. I've never heard of him. I don't know who he is. His name's Tommy T, a poster at I won't say the name site. Makes a very good point that the man seen by the three sunbathers was not the man who parked behind Brian Hartnell's car. The Zodiac's inner tire to inner base was measured at 52 inches, and all three witnesses gave matching descriptions of the man they saw driving as a Chevy. The smallest Chevy he could find was 59 inches, which is still too large. So at the very least, we know the man seen by the three girls was probably not the person who parked behind Brian's car. I trust what Tommy says because everyone agrees he's a great researcher, blah, blah, blah. I've never heard of him, and he doesn't have a suspect. He is very unbiased and very logical, and he's been around for a very long time, blah, blah, blah. So I don't know, just somebody else making a comment about the cars. And this is something from crimelibrary.org. I saw this 3 or 4 year old documentary that Mark Hewitt was in. Speaking of Mark Hewitt again, and he was somebody else was in the documentary. I just woke the guy up that always likes to go to sleep listening to this show. He's going to get pissed again. But it's called crimelibrary.org. But I saw when Mark was being interviewed for this Travel Channel Zodiac documentary. I think it's 4 or 5 years old. I don't know. But I saw it for the first time yesterday. But he called that little island. I think it's more of an island now that Brian and Cecilia were on because of all the erosion on there. But I heard Mark refer to that as Zodiac Island. But this article, back when Brian and Cecilia were attacked in 1969, it was actually on a peninsula. It had the water on 3 sides of it, and it went out, the little peninsula went out into Lake Berryessa. But this article is calling it Twin Oak Ridge Peninsula, which I've never heard that term before. So there's something new. If you want to know something new, they used to call that Twin Oak Ridge, I guess because of the oak trees or something like that. But it says Cecilia and Shepard and Brian Calvin Hartnell, 2 college students who had also made a spontaneous trip from Angwin, were picnicking at Twin Oak Ridge, a peninsula on the western shore of the lake, at twilight when they were approached by a man later described as 5'8" to 6 feet tall, dark-haired. I don't know where they got that from. Maybe the voyeur sketch, and heavy-set, wearing a dark jacket and dark clothing that seemed sloppy or disheveled. Of course, that comes from Brian, but they both said brown hair. They never said light brown, but Cecilia and Brian Hartnell both said they saw brown hair coming through the islets. Yes, of course, that's Corky. I don't remember that. You read one of the reports. There was also a vehicle with Arizona plates in the parking lot, but no detail on description. I don't remember that. I'll have to look into it. Willie's Jeep has a narrow wheelbase and narrow bias ply tires. Yeah, definitely Willie's Jeeps were around then. I have to go back and look at all that. But I never got in really heavy if trying to pick if the voyeur was Zodiac or not. I always thought, well, why was he looking at 3 females unless he was just had to make the attack that day? And he'd prefer a couple, but he was maybe giving up on that until Brian and Cecilia show up, because obviously he was over there spotting them for a while before he decided to make his move. I gotta go back and read about that. So that is all I have for now. Thanks for tuning in. I think we're going to move it up to 8 o'clock next week, because it's starting to go a little late. But the new start time might be 8 o'clock, and then I think I'm going to start doing some missing people stuff on Wednesdays. Something I've been thinking about. But thanks for tuning in. Everybody have a good week. Thanks to everybody that showed up in the live chat. Bye.